Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/kyhistorypod. Welcome back to the Kentucky History Podcast. I'm your host, Jameson Cable, and we got a great Kentucky story here we're going to talk about. I have author, Mr. Reed here. How you doing?
I'm doing just fine. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, and you have written a book called Tongues of Deception, and it's based on a true story that was based out of Kentucky here. A very intriguing book that as you sent or brought to my attention, and I think we got a pretty good story here to talk about.
Yes, like I said, it's really piqued my interest. I've been into genealogy for over 35 years,
Mm-hmm.
and that's how I found out about this story.
Mm-hmm. Well, before we get too much into the story, tell us a little bit about your Kentucky connection and so forth.
Well, I am related to people on all different sides of this story, so that's how I got involved in it. My reed line was actually in Greenup County, Kentucky, before they moved up to Ohio, but my Sumter line and my Hall line were down in Martin County, Boyd County. So when I started researching my cousins and all that, that's how I found out about this.
Well, that's usually how it goes with the genealogy research. You find something, and you realize there's more to the story.
Right. And I just, when I read what happened, it was just hard for me to believe that they could get 8 people to go along with that.
Yeah, yeah. Kind of crazy when you think about how it happened, and like even well, let's not get too much into it. Where do we begin with this story?
Well, I guess what really got me interested in this was to find out that there had never been a book written about this.
Yeah.
And that really got me looking into it more. And the story had basically been buried by the people of Martin County.
Mm-hmm.
I know there's still a stigma attached to the Mills family down there. I found that out when I tried to talk to descendants of the Mills family, and also any family that was involved with it, whether they were descendants of law enforcement or
Mm-hmm.
the judges. Um, I'm related by marriage to the Mills family. I'm actually the fourth cousin of John H. Mills,
Wow.
his wife, not a fourth cousin of his, but a fourth cousin of
Mm-hmm.
his wife. Her maiden name was Hall, and that's my middle name.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm also related. I'm a fourth cousin of one of the doctors that testified in the trial.
Okay.
And I'm related by marriage and blood to Harrison Hinkle, who was one of the deputies on the case.
Wow. Yeah. So
So
you are
you
connected.
can understand why I wanted to look into this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was just, I mean, every time I turned around, there was something else, like the prosecuting attorney was Mr. Priest, and his brother was the defense attorney.
Okay.
So I thought it was a little strange, but I know, things like that happened back then. But it really piqued my interest in the story. And the schoolhouse that they used to have some of their services in was owned by a Mr. Harden, and he was related to the judge that did the inquest.
Okay.
So we had a lot of that going on, and you had cousins arresting cousins, and I mean, it was just
Uh,
too much to pass up.
yeah, yeah, and so this took place in the 1930s, correct? Or well, I guess the
Yeah,
conclusion of this story.
right, 1933,
Mhm,
right, is when this all happened. But it went back a little bit further than that. There was a girl by the name of they called her Little Mary. She was Mary Evelyn Skaggs, and she was actually born in Ironton, Ohio. But she became a preacher for the Pentecostal church when she was 14,
mhm,
and she caused quite a stir around Kentucky, well, Southern Ohio, Kentucky, and even into West Virginia with her sermons. And um, she actually, in 1929, when she was there, she actually stayed with the Mills family
mhm.
while she was down there. So they knew who she was, and she had attended some of their services once they got a church going down there. And that's kind of how it all started. And then there's another character that comes into this is the Reverend William H. Duty,
Mhm.
um, who was a man that he was in his 50s when all this happened. And he got, he mined. He was a track man for a mining company down there. And of course, everybody farmed down there. So he was doing that, and it got pretty rough for him
Yeah.
once he started to age. So he was kind of looking for something different. And when he saw Little Mary, a light went off in his head.
Mhm,
And he thought, well, I can do this.
mhm.
And so he starts doing these revivals. That's how he runs into John Mills. And John, in 1929, had lost his 2-year-old daughter
Mhm.
to measles. And that kind of set him on a spiral downward.
Yeah.
Um, he missed a lot of work. He had a really good job. He actually had an 8th grade education, which was pretty good for that time in that area.
Yeah.
And he had a pretty good job. He was working for a gas company, Cumberland Gas Company, as a repairman. And but when his daughter died, the depression that set in with him caused him to miss quite a bit of work, and he ended up losing that job.
Yeah. Yeah.
But and I don't know how far you want me to go into this, but
As far as you want.
um, but he does eventually get that job back after 2 or 3 months.
Mhm.
Um, and he meets this William Duty, and he's really enthralled with the Pentecostal services. He was a Baptist. His whole family were Baptist.
Mhm.
And he'd never seen anything like that before. And he really took to it, so much so that he joined the church, and had his wife join the church. And they just got into it so much that this William Duty was looking for somebody to plant a Pentecostal church in
Mhm.
Tomahawk.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so he, unbeknownst to John, had been working with John's brother-in-law,
Mhm.
Blaine McGinnis. Blaine McGinnis was working for him on his farm. And Blaine had told William Duty about John, and that John was really a man of God and could help him out if he wanted to plant a church. And so John and William Duty meet just happenstance. John's coming home from work one day, and he sees him putting up the big white tent for the revival, and walks over and starts talking to the people there, and ends up meeting William Duty. And goes to a couple of revivals, and he gets into it head on.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, what about the Skaggs girl, the one that was the young preacher?
Well, little Mary, she died not too long. She got tuberculosis and died, and I don't know, but it was in the early 30s when she died. So she was about 21, I think, 20 or 21 when she passed away. So she didn't affect John so much as she did William Duty. But John did know her, and she had attended some of their services that they tried to put together. But she died very soon thereafter. So she had more of an effect on William Duty than John.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting thing, one, to be that young and be a preacher, but also a female being the preacher at that young age.
Right. Yeah. Now her dad was a Pentecostal preacher as well, so that's where she got started, obviously. And the way I understand it, she's in the Pentecostal Hall of Fame. So.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know there was a Pentecostal Hall of Fame,
Yeah. And she really set everything on its ear, when she started. Only her death stopped her. She toured constantly.
Wow.
Some of these diseases that they had back then that we can take care of now, just took so many lives back then.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
well, when talking about Pentecostal church, I know there's different branches and so forth, just like many different denominations. The Pentecostal churches that we're talking about, these would be snake handlers and that kind of.
Well, there's different part. Not all Pentecostal churches, handle snakes.
Yeah.
And this was one that did. And that became a pivotal part of this. It was pretty obvious to me when I started doing my research. Like I contacted 125 descendants of people that were involved in this case one way or another.
Yeah.
Now, there were a lot that wouldn't talk to me, and I actually ended up interviewing 23 of them.
Wow.
And
so you're saying the other ones would not talk out of
right. That's what I say. There's still a stigma down there, and that was a big part of me writing this book too. First off, I don't want anything like this to ever happen again, and I think we need to learn from history and not bury it.
Yeah.
And I can see where there were a lot of different ways people were trying to bury this story. The court manuscripts were stolen from the courthouse.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so, a lot of things like that happen. They didn't even mark this lady's grave, Lucinda Mills. They didn't even mark her grave.
Whoa, that's big.
Yeah. And it was like they wanted this to never have happened,
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you go down there and talk to people today about it, what you'll find is the people that are descendants of the Mills family have one story. The descendants of anybody in law enforcement during that time period, they have a different story. The descendants of the doctor that I'm related to had a different story. The descendants of the judges and the attorneys, they all had different stories. I actually heard 4 different ways that Lucinda was killed.
Oh, wow.
And,
So
oral history has a way of doing that.
yeah.
Because, everybody's family has their own agenda, how they want something to be remembered. And
Very
that's
true.
kind of what was at play here.
Mhm. So did you use a lot of newspapers or just
Oh,
oral
yeah.
histories or
Thank goodness for newspaper.com. You can go ahead.
That's right.
I mean, this was nationwide news for 4
Wow.
months back in
I had
1933. I mean, it
yeah.
was in newspapers in LA and New York City and all across the country
Wow.
for 4 months, so there's no shortage of newspaper articles on it.
Mhm.
And I was able to get the court records, what are left of them, but, the most important part was the manuscripts of the trial,
Mhm.
and they're gone.
Oh, gosh.
But I do have a lot of the court records. I was able to get penitentiary records.
Mhm.
So, like I said, it took me 2 years to research this.
Yeah, and, probably would've been a little bit quicker if people would've, cooperated a little bit better.
Right, and if the stories kinda gelled, you know?
Yeah.
So, what I ended up doing was I took all these newspaper accounts and just laid them in order, and I had a timeline of that, and then I put the court records on top of that. And in my interviews, I tried to see where things would fit,
Mm,
and
mhm.
some things obviously were way off base and they weren't gonna fit, so I would just have to throw that out. The book, everything in the book, I have people ask me all the time, is this true? Is everything in the book true? Well, for a story that nobody's around, nobody's alive that was there when this happened,
Yeah.
all we have is what people say they heard. So, I tried not to use things unless I had at least two sources telling me the same thing.
Yeah.
So I didn't put something in the book just because somebody said something about it. I had to have gotten it from multiple sources. And it had to line up with what was being said in the newspaper. Now, in my interviews, before and after I wrote the book, I mean, I've not stopped researching this.
That's the way it goes.
I just, I keep finding things out, but, you know, like people will swear that chains were not used in the murder.
Mhm.
And they'll just say the newspapers got that all wrong. Well, court records say that the sheriff said that she was wrapped in chains. A deputy sheriff said they were wrapped in well, three deputy sheriffs said testified that she was wrapped in chains. The states or the Commonwealth of Kentucky's star witness, Rhoda Hatfield Mills, uh, she looked in the window and saw Lucinda wrapped in chains. There's a picture of the sheriff standing there with chains in his hands.
Mhm.
But despite all of this, they say that's all wrong. That's what chains weren't used.
Huh.
So, I don't feel these people are lying to me. I just feel that that's what they believe.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what they've been told, and that's
The story they're
what I'm
sticking
gonna
with.
believe, you know. But, I found a guy. Um, do you remember Leonard Mills from the book
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
was in the insane asylum?
Mhm.
Well, I found his son.
Oh, wow.
His son lives about 15 minutes from me.
Whoa.
He was, he was, uh, he was actually in the process of writing a book.
Mhm.
Still hasn't released that book. I think he did release a paper on it to the
Mhm.
Martin County Historical Society, but he's not released his book yet. But he wasn't born until like 4 years after this happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, he claims to be an expert on this, but he only knows
What's been
what he's
told.
been told.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he's seen the newspaper articles, and I'm assuming he's got the court records,
Mhm.
but again, he wasn't there. There's nobody that was there that is still alive.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, we don't, all that has been lost to history.
Hmm.
But, that's why I tried my best just to stick with the facts
Put the pieces together.
and put the pieces together. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So we kind of got a little bit um, through the just so John, right? That
John Mills. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So he got to the point where he had met William, right? Is it William?
William Duty. Mhm.
William Duty. Well, then what conspires after that? They've
Well, like I said, William Duty wanted to plant a Pentecostal church. He had started one, and he was from Paintsville,
Mhm.
and he had started one in Paintsville, and he thought, well, one makes so much money, two will make
More.
more. So he wants another church started, and John helps him do that, and it becomes pretty successful,
Mhm.
and they're doing really good. But what John found out was the better the church did, the more William Duty tried to push him out.
Oh.
And there became a struggle over, whose church it was.
Mhm. Mhm.
And things, I mean, this, it went on for a couple years, and then things really turned bad quickly. Um, John feels like he's being pushed out. William Duty was allowing him to even preach there early,
Mhm.
early on, and then as their congregation got larger, William Duty started sending people over from Johnson County to do the preaching, um, and John just felt like he was being pushed out, and they ended up arguing about it one week, and then the following week there was a big fist fight during the
Yeah.
service. John really hurt William Duty bad. I mean, there's been more. I know that he had a glass eye,
Mhm.
but I couldn't find out for sure how that happened. I heard two different stories. One was when John got in a fight with him, he ended up losing that eye. But I also heard a story where he got hurt in a mining accident,
Mm.
lost the eye. So I really don't know how that happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
I,
Um,
I talked to people later on that that knew William Duty later on, and they talked about, they were kids when they saw him, and it always kind of freaked them out when he'd pull his eye out and
uh,
put it in a glass of water.
yeah.
So I know for a fact that that happened, that he had
Yeah.
an eye.
Yeah.
But anyway, um, obviously there's big trouble between William and John, and there's like three different factions in this church. There's one that wants to go on with John as the leader.
Mhm.
There's a faction that want them both out of there and just start over.
Mhm.
And then there's a faction that still wants William Duty in there.
Yeah.
So it goes on like that for about a week. And then John just decides he's going to start his own church.
Yeah.
And he, pretty quickly, he's got his family members and his neighbors, and, he's got about 30, 35 people following him around. And all these rumors get started that he's doing these miracles, healing people, and, changing water into wine and sticks into snakes.
Mm.
Um, but then, as quickly as these rumors of these healings and everything start, you start hearing that it's not true, and
Yeah.
it's all false. So a lot of his neighbors leave him,
Mhm.
and the cult, they started calling it the cult of the unknown tongues, and it dwindles down to about 10 people,
Mm-hmm.
basically just his family. And I kind of believe that this whole time, John just kind of went off and had revenge on his mind.
Yeah.
But he tells his followers that God's given him a divine command, and that divine command is that they're to sacrifice William H. Doody.
Yeah.
So they send a couple of guys over to Paintsville to try to lure him back, saying, we John's quit the church, and we want you to come back, and can you come to service on Sunday? And it's all a trap.
Mm-hmm.
And William Doody tells them, yeah, I'll be there. Well, he obviously smells something, because he doesn't show up.
Mm-hmm.
But now John's kind of stuck, because he says he's told these people that this is divine command, and so now he's thinking, well, I still need to sacrifice somebody.
Yeah, it gets dark real quick.
Yeah, I mean, he'd had these people even before they talked about William Doody. He had them starting to fast, fasting and staying up all night and singing and chanting and dancing. This is February too. It's cold out. He has them bring all their children to the cabin, to Tommy Boyd's cabin where they're having this service. It's just not a good scene. The neighbors are all getting worried. They're talking to the sheriff, saying, you need to do something about this. And he's like, oh, this happens, I've seen this happen before. It'll all calm down. So he kind of lets it go. And, anyway, they decide, or John decides, by another divine command, that his sister-in-law and sister are to be sacrificed.
Hey.
And they actually have them chained to a wooden altar and doused with gasoline. And one is Trixie Mills, and the other one is Ora Moore. Ora is John's sister, and Trixie's his sister-in-law. And Trixie's 9 months pregnant.
Oh.
And John's standing there with a torch ready to set it ablaze. And all the other ones are just dancing and singing and going along with this. And Trixie just hollers out that she doesn't want this to happen. And John just puts the torch down and says, you've ruined it. It's got to be a willing sacrifice.
Oh.
So they don't get sacrificed. So then they start talking about, well, by this time, Tommy Boyd, whose cabin this was happening at in his barn, his wife Talitha, who was John's sister, have decided they've had enough of this.
Yeah.
And they go off to get help. So now John starts talking about sacrificing 4 of his daughters. Tommy's and Talitha's daughters.
Oh.
So thankfully that doesn't happen either, because he's kind of opened his mouth saying it's got to be a willing sacrifice, and he knows his kids aren't going to be willing to have that done. So somehow, he brings in this Leonard Mills, his brother Leonard, who is in the insane asylum, state hospital. What is that, Lexington? I believe it's in Lexington. And he says that God tells him that if they have this sacrifice, this human sacrifice, that they'll be able to get Leonard out of there. And his mother volunteers. She wants Leonard out of that institution.
Yeah.
And she'd had a sister that died there years before. So obviously she's got bad feelings about that place. And she says that she'll do it.
Jeez.
And they lock all the kids in a bedroom in the cabin, and they all go in the cabin. They lay her down on the bed, wrap chains around her. The group's singing, dancing, and chanting, and John jumps up on top of Lucinda and strangles her.
Jeez.
And right as that's happening, Rhoda Hatfield Mills has heard the screams and cries of the children.
Mm-hmm.
And she comes over and she's bringing biscuits for the kids. She wants to make sure the kids are getting fed. She goes knocking on the door, and John's on top of his mother. Ballard Mills, the grandson of Lucinda, opens the door and tells her to get out of there.
Mm-hmm.
And shuts the door and locks it. Well, as she's leaving, she looks in the window and she sees John on top of Lucinda and sees the chains around Lucinda.
Mm-hmm.
She starts running home, and as she's running home, she runs into the 3 deputies and sheriff that are coming to investigate it, finally, and tells them, you need to get there quick.
Yeah.
And so they go running in, they bust the door down, but it was too late.
Yeah.
They were just minutes too late.
Mm-hmm.
But
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's a one.
And they were going to, once they killed her, they were going to take her out and put her on that altar and
Mm-hmm.
burn her. And John told everybody that she'd come back in 3 days.
Wow. Oh.
And of course, they're all arrested. As soon as they're arrested, they're all driven over to Inez.
Mm-hmm.
And put in jail there. And the people start coming out of the woods, relatives and all that, and they take all the children.
Yeah.
Take them back. And, the trial begins. And, the defense attorney brought in 2 doctors from the insane asylum to testify as to the sanity of this group.
Yeah.
And the Commonwealth of Kentucky brought in 2 medical doctors that had no experience with this.
Mm-hmm.
And the medical doctors ruled that they were perfectly sane. And the 2 doctors from the insane asylum testified that they were all at least temporarily insane. But the Commonwealth of Kentucky decided to take the medical doctors' advice on this, so they had to stand trial.
Yeah. Well, that's just there's a lot to take in there.
Yeah.
You want to say that nothing like that would happen today, but I can't rule. I mean, crazy things happen.
Oh yeah. Like I said, this was one of the reasons why I wanted to write this book, because I want people to see what can happen when you don't let yourself get in that position.
Yeah. I just wonder what got them to that point. Not.
Well, I mean, obviously, I think it's just a combination of the fasting, staying up all night, and being cold. And also, I mean, you got to remember, this was during the time of the Depression, and people were looking for something.
Ways out, if you want to say it.
Yeah, right.
Oh, geez. But
all that together, and John had been doing pretty good when he was running the church, and now that was being taken away from him. I think it was just all too much for him.
Yeah.
This was a guy that really never had much, and now he's, a respected person, doing pretty well financially, and that's all being taken away from him by William Duty. So
that can cause you to break, I guess.
Yeah,
Now, did he end up? I mean, he went to trial.
yeah. They went to trial, and three of them were found guilty, and everybody else was um, released.
Mhm,
And John was found guilty of first-degree murder,
mhm.
and Blaine McGinnis was found guilty of accessory to murder, and Ballard Mills was found guilty of accessory to murder. Blaine got a life sentence, or no, I'm sorry, John got a life sentence. Blaine and Ballard got 21 years each.
Mhm.
None of them served their time, not even close.
Wow.
Blaine was out in 2 months.
What?
Yes. And Ballard was out in 2 years, and John was out in 7 years.
Wow.
All under the ruse of overcrowded prisons.
Wow. Jeez, what'd they do after that?
Well,
Whoa.
that's a part of my book too, and I did want to show that the vast majority of them went on with their lives, and people at that time were able to forgive them because most of them stayed right there
Mhm.
in Martin County and went on with their lives and were married and had children and jobs and everything else.
Yeah.
John was really the only one that didn't. I mean, he went up to Akron, Ohio, like I said, when the Goodyear rubber plant opened up. He
Yeah.
went up there and got a job up there and ended up marrying a woman. And he was married and divorced from her 3 different times.
Mhm.
But he ended up moving back down to Martin County and lived next door to one of the women that he almost sacrificed. So,
Oh,
there was some forgiveness going on,
yeah.
back at that time. But it seems like nowadays there's such a stigma release or attached to the Mills family that
Mhm.
it's a shame because I know a lot of them, and
Mhm.
they're great people.
Mhm.
All of them, and the Moore family, Ora Moore, and um, Ballard Mills, became. I mean, they just went on with their life, and they were able to make things out of themselves that were positive.
Yeah.
Which should be told.
Yeah. Wow. That is I mean, out of all the stories, I mean, there's a lot of wild stories in Kentucky.
Yeah.
That one is a very,
Well, I tell you what. I mean,
very unique.
I've had two movie producers
Mhm.
contact me about it, and I've actually just agreed to have it adapted for a movie.
Wow. Well, yeah, I've said this before about a lot of Kentucky history, that it sounds like, a Hollywood movie, but
Yeah,
this one probably, whew, takes the cake. I mean, it is,
and it's
heart-wrenching in many ways.
yeah, and I don't know how they weren't found insane. I mean, it still blows my mind
Yeah,
when I see the court records, and they didn't think they were insane.
yeah, yeah,
I mean, at least temporarily insane.
yeah.
You know, uh,
I mean,
it was a different time, I guess. I mean, I think
yeah,
today they probably would have considered them insane, but
yeah, it would take a lot, I would think, to strangle your own mother.
yeah,
And
yeah.
and
I don't know how you could be in your right mind.
yeah, yeah. Oh, gosh.
You know,
Well
that's the way it went.
yeah, keep us posted on, the movie process, I mean,
I
when
will. I will. Yeah, we've already. I've had one meeting with them. We're going to start writing the screenplay in the middle of this month,
Mhm. Well, cool, that's awesome.
and they want me involved in that. So
Mm-hmm.
I told them, well, I've never written a screenplay before. I said, well, yeah, but you know so much about it that
Yeah.
it would be helpful to have you there. So we're going to start doing that, and we hope to film on location there in
In Martin County. Wow.
Martin County
Yeah,
and
that'd be great.
Johnson County. Yeah.
Yeah. Which I mean, that's it's, well, I mean, I say this, but I was gonna say this. Martin County has plenty of Kentucky history, but every county in Kentucky does. But
Sure. Yeah.
it seems lately I've really been diving into the Martin County history, Himmlerville, and some other places.
Oh yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
That's another big story there.
yeah. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, well, where can people get the book and get in contact
Oh,
with
it's
you?
available on Amazon,
Mhm,
Amazon.com, Kindle.
mhm.
They
Uh,
can find me on Facebook, Harry H. Reed.
mhm. Yeah, well, we appreciate you coming on here and talking about it, and I would very much encourage people to get the book and get those more details. There's so much that goes
Oh,
into
yeah. I
these
mean,
stories.
that's the thing. I mean, there's a lot of information in that book, and I had people tell me I should change the names and locations and all of that, and I said it just wouldn't mean anything to me if I did that.
Yeah, yeah,
So it's a very accurate book. I mean, I was telling my wife, I said, how many people, like when I talk about the weather in this book, I actually researched what the weather was that day.
yeah.
So if,
Oh,
if it's
good.
in the book, it happened.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, we appreciate you taking the time to research it and put a story to the tales,
Yeah.
and that and like you said, having those first person accounts are key, but when you don't have them, you really gotta dig deep and
Well,
find.
like I said, I ended up with 23 interviews, but
Mhm.
all of those people, weren't alive when it happened.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
that's good. That's well, yeah. Thank you again for coming on. Anything else before we go?
Jameson, nope, I think that covers it.
All right. Well, thank you all for
Thanks for having
listening.
me on.
Yeah, yeah.
Appreciate that.
Anytime. And when the movie details come back out, you come back on and talk about those.
Will do.
um,
Sure thing.
well, yeah. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time. Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/kyhistorypod. You've probably heard about Daniel Boone, but what about the rest of the frontiersmen who came to Kentucky and settled? That's what we want to bring to the Kentucky History Channel. The stories of the untold, the stories of those forgotten. One thing to expect on our channel is great Kentucky content. Some stories that you've never heard of. The Night Riders, who began in western Kentucky. Bloody Monday, the riots in Louisville. The assassination of Governor Goebel, the only governor ever assassinated in the United States. Stories from all over Kentucky, stories that are unforgettable once you've heard them. You can find out who counties in Kentucky are named after and how your county got started. From beginning to end, we plan to document every county in Kentucky, all 120. Reach out to us on all of our social media platforms. Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and also leave a comment on one of our YouTube videos. You can also check out our podcast episodes. You can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and many more. We're always seeking to find more Kentucky history so we can bring it to you, the viewers, the listeners. We want all the stories and all the events from Kentucky's great history to be told and shared everywhere.